evening, he writes, then in Greenville, South Carolina, in defiance of the state's time-honored blue laws, the Fox Theater opened on Sunday. 7 of us, regular attenders of the Methodist Youth Fellowship at Buncombe Street Church, made a pact to enter the front door of the church, be seen, then quietly slip out the back door and join John Wayne at the Fox Theater. That evening has come to represent a watershed in the history of Christendom, South Carolina style. On that night, Greenville, South Carolina, the last pocket of resistance to secularity in the Western world, served notice that it would no longer be a prop for the church. There would be no more free passes, no more free rides. Willimon says that while it may seem trivial to date the collapse of Christendom to that Sunday evening in 1963, he would also say that before that night, he didn't have a choice between going to church and going to the movies. The church was the only show in town. On Sundays, the town closed down, he writes. You couldn't even buy a gallon of gas. The most exciting thing that happened all day was a traffic jam when everyone's trying to get to Sunday school. Some of you probably remember when things were like that, but they are not that way anymore, are they? And you might be wondering, what happened? I wonder that. Now, this was even true up until a few years ago with Christmas Day and Thanksgiving Day, right? On Thanksgiving, you would spend time with your family, whether you like them or not. And then after the meal was done, you would wait patiently, or I would wait patiently as a little kid for the adults to finish up their conversation so that we can go home. But there was nothing else to do. You would watch maybe football games if you were into football games. I wasn't, and so I would get bored. But you would have to figure out a way to bide your time because there was nothing else going on. All the stores were closed, even the supermarkets. And the same was true for Christmas as well. Maybe if you were a church-going type, you would go to church. Our family, we were Buddhists, and so we didn't. Maybe you would, and then you would reach out to your friends, try to call them on the phone, see what they got for what sort of presents they got, play with their presents, gather with friends. But it was a more boring day of sorts, where that was limited, where you were limited to just spending time with people. Oh, the horror. Not really. I miss those days. But even those days where Christmas and Thanksgiving were times of peace, those days, peace and rest are now gone too. So maybe Willimon is right. Maybe it's because the Fox Theater opened on a Sunday night. Or maybe it's because everything started opening on Sundays. Bowling alleys, grocery stores, shopping malls, sports leagues. Maybe because the baby boom eventually came to an end. Or maybe because many of those babies grew up and went off to fight in Vietnam. Maybe it's because inventions like air conditioning and television and smartphones made it a little too easy to stay home on Sunday mornings. Whatever the reasons, the cultural forces that used to push people through the gates and the doors of the church began to pull them back out again when we entered the late 60s and early 70s, when sanctuaries started to empty out. And church leaders started wondering, what was wrong and how could this be fixed? It was about this time that youth ministers from Chicago decided to start a new church. And they started by doing a survey, by going around and asking people why they weren't coming to church anymore. The people said things like the music was outdated, the sermons weren't relevant, and they didn't like to dress up on Sundays. So Bill Hybels and Dave Holmbo started a church called Willow Creek that met in a theater where people could listen to contemporary Christian music. Sermons were edgy and relevant. Dramas were brought in to bring home the points. Best of all, You didn't have to dress up to go to church. Now, that church was a phenomenal success. And over 15,000 people were attending the services. Even though they might have felt very different from the kind of worship we would have here at Surge, but they were certainly seeker friendly. That was the buzzword, right? Seeker friendly church. And so everyone started to copy Willow Creek. And all these community churches started popping up all around the world. Live bands, music that seemed like rock concerts, gifted speakers who gave essentially beautiful gospel-filled TED Talks, wearing aloha shirts, maybe golf shirts, with a lot of illustrations, and trying to figure out ways to cope with the struggles and the challenges of life. Trying to figure out how to raise happy children, successful families. And all these churches started doing things different from the way church was done. Getting rid of hymn books, prayer books, organs, and people responded. They began to leave their old churches, or the churches changed and they came to the new ones, or the churches were reinvented. But I think some of what was missed at this time was a shift from a model in which people came to church out of duty, devotion, or habit to a model where we tried to make coming to church attractive. It's subtle. But what happens when you start making coming to church attractive? You start thinking about what people like and how you can give it to them. Do they like coffee and donuts? Well, give it to them. Do they like contemporary worship? Give it to them. Do they like preaching that relates to everyday life? Give it to them. The problem, of course, is that some churches are better at doing this than others. Some have more resources than others. And so a few churches in town become mega churches, while the rest simply struggle to survive. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't have anything against relevant preaching. I have nothing against contemporary worship, and I love coffee and donuts. But when you make up your mind to do whatever it takes to get people to come to church, then you will get that kind of church, a congregation of fickle religious consumers who will leave you as soon as the next church opens up a better program. But here's another truth. Some people aren't going to come back to church no matter what we do. In 1960, half of the United States population was going to church on a regular basis. And slowly that number has declined. Now, it's probably in the 20% nationwide of people going to church. And as people who like statistics start saying, if you plot this out, then in the next 50 years, the church will cease to exist. Let's get back to Simeon. Simeon was old. He was old enough to remember what Israel was before the Romans came, to remember what it was like to be free. The good old days. And Simeon and the others were praying for deliverance ever since then. When Joseph and Mary walked into the temple with Jesus in their arms, Simeon said, "Now, Lord, I can die in peace. My eyes have seen your salvation." What would it take for you to say that here at Sturge? What would it take for you to say, "Now, Lord, now I can die in peace. My eyes have seen your salvation"? What kind of reassurance would you need that things are going to be okay? Is it enough to know that God is with us? And if God is with us, then all will be well? The truth is that in the holiest moments in Israel's history, it all happened while they were in the wilderness, worshiping God in a tent. The truth is that the Bible was compiled. The Old Testament was compiled and preserved when they were in exile in Babylon. Now, we don't know what the future will bring for us. But I believe this. If God is with us, all will be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. Now, we all survived the pandemic, right? Sturge Presbyterian Church has survived the pandemic and numerous other challenges that it's faced, that you all have faced in the years before. And while a big part of it was due to the hard work of many here, we need to remember, especially as we start a new year, just as Simeon, to take Jesus in our arms and to continue to praise God. As Simeon was prophesying over all that was going on, he told Mary, a sword will pierce your own soul too. And perhaps when he was saying this, he was being prophetic, right? Jesus is hanging on the cross. A spear pierces his side. And Simeon is telling Mary, as she is standing there, that she will feel like a sword has pierced her side as she watches to see the suffering of Jesus. As she watches and sees her own son die. In the same way, being people of Jesus, following Jesus comes with a cost. It comes with the cost of saying that our identity is not found in the things that so many people place their identity in. Our ethnic backgrounds, the foods they will enjoy, our social economic status. Instead of all these things, political parties, instead of all these things, we find a new identity. An identity that says Jesus is Lord. An identity that says that while following Jesus is hard, while following Jesus is costly, while following Jesus is full of suffering because we're doing something different from the way that the world will do, that following Jesus is worth it. And just like following Jesus comes at a cost that Jesus himself was willing to pay, where he was rejected, where he was shunned, where he challenged people, to live into a life full of grace, a life that wasn't about following the laws, a life that was about following love, a life lived out of following conviction. And because of that, he was put on trial. He died. He was executed. But we also see that Jesus was raised from the dead. 3 days later, after his crucifixion, Jesus was raised from the dead to show us and to remind us that all will be well. To remind us and to give us hope. A hope that says death is not the final word. And if death is not the final word, then neither are all these little challenges that we face in life. Jesus promises that he will come and return to make all things right one day. And that's the final thing that we look forward to in this season of Christmas, right? In the season of Christmas, we focus so much on Jesus' birth. We continue to journey along until Easter, his resurrection, until Pentecost, when he is raised up, all looking forward to that day when Jesus will return to make all things right. And as we are on a journey, we're reminded of all the ways that God will bless us, not because of our obedience, but because of the tremendous life that is given to all those who follow Jesus. As I look forward to 2024, I don't know what it's going to bring. I'm a nervous Nelly. I worry about the future. I look back at the past and I find comfort in it. Yet I wonder if Simeon could look back, having remembered the glory days of Israel, of being in a tremendous amount of suffering and pain for the ways that the Romans had conquered and taken over and destroyed Jerusalem. If Simeon could see and hold Jesus and know that all would be well, is that too little of a thing for us to do as well? As we enter into 2024, may we be challenged to trust God, to put our faith and trust in Jesus, to follow him, and to know that all will be well.